Alrighty, welcome back. Um, we're really stoked to have Matt here again. He's come all the way from England. We're grateful to have him out a second time. Matt does a whole bunch of really cool shit. Probably the most succinct description is Matt makes tools for locks that pretty much the rest of the lock sport considers, or the lock sport community considers unpickable. And he makes tools that pick them. Sometimes he makes tools that not only decode them for you, but also self-impression. So it's like the creme de la creme of a tool because it opens the lock for you, it gives you the combination, and you have a working key basically at that point in time. So I'm going to pass over to Matt and let him continue.
Right. Yeah, so self-impressioning is what I'm talking about today. Right. So just a little bit about me. This is, oh, hold on. I pressed the wrong button. There we go. All right, so I'm Matt Smith, otherwise known as Huxleypig from off the internet. Background was in software engineering. I've done a lot of the other SE, so social engineering, which involves making things like this and getting into sporting events and music events, that sort of thing. I've never worked for Oxfam either. Wrong button. Okay, so now I pretty much just make tools. And I look for what I like to call physical ODAs, which are undisclosed vulnerabilities in physical locking systems. And I specialise in disk detainer locks from an Abloy classic obsession going back many years, but that's not the only thing that I work with. So I got into locksmithing by liberating this from these. And what got me into that was this tool. We've probably all seen this tool, right? This is a tubular self-impressioning tool. If James Bond had a pick, then this would be it. It literally just goes in the lock, wiggles, and opens on the cheaper locks anyway. And we can see this working. What's the timing on that? 1 minute 30. Thanks to Lockpicking Lower for this, by the way. So this is just another example of this tool. Okay, so blink and you'll miss this, and it goes. That's it, the lock's open. It's like using the key very often. And when I saw this, my jaw just hit the floor. I was like, what? That must be fake. Is that really a thing? And yeah. Since then, I've seen other crazier tools than this, and I've invented a couple. But that tool is what you can blame for everything that led up to now. All right, so I'm going to have a look at the theory of self-impressioning and look at some practical examples of locks getting self-impressioned, going from the more common to the less common. And finally look at some tool-making considerations. So this has been covered a million times, but just in case you don't know what standard impressioning is, I'll just brush over it. So it's taking a key blank and ending up with a working key from that key blank. And you do it by introducing it into the lock, giving it a wiggle, and filing away at the marks that you can see. That's a very nice example of one. And you repeat this process and you'll have a working key. And it takes effort, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of skill. You have to practice it a lot to get good at it at least. This is a key I self-impressioned at LockCon a few years ago. This technique will work on pretty much any lock on the planet, which is what's nice about it. So long as there's some sort of physical blockage when you try and turn the plug with the wrong key or with a tensioner. And I like to say that a locked mechanism isn't happy, so if you try and tension a lock, then something in there is going to be jarring or being twisted or sheared. Something's not going to be happy inside there. The lock's happy when there's nothing resisting the motion of it. And that's what we want to get the lock into the state of when we're impressioning or self-impressioning. And that works because we could never make the perfect lock, even with the best machining techniques today. This is my awesome paint diagram. You can see the circles are just slightly off center. You can never make the perfect circles, the perfect pins. Locks have to have tolerances, is the point. Even if we could make the perfect lock, we wouldn't want to do that. The slightest bit of dust or sand or anything would just jam the lock up totally. Even the heat from your hands going through the key would make the metal swell and it'd jam, if it was that perfect. So you have to have tolerances. So when a pin is correctly set, these tolerances give the pin a little bit of wobble, and I'm going to call that pin wobble, and I'm going to be coming back to this. So remember, this is the amount of movement from a correctly set pin or lever or disc, a correctly set element. All we need to know is the difference between something that's wrong, a binding pin, and something that's not binding. We're not looking to find the cuts so much as looking to discount the cuts that are wrong, and by elimination that'll get you to the key. We exploit this when impressioning and picking and everything. Jos and Holly, they're doing a lot of impressioning, so ask them about standard impressioning if you want to know more about that. So self-impressioning is a bit different. It takes typically much less time, much less skill. It depends on the tool that you're using, but a child can operate most of the self-impressioning tools that exist. This is the big one though, reliability, and I'll be coming back to this a few times. Self-impressioning tools are not as reliable as standard impressioning, or generally. Typically, the tool is only introduced once into the lock, rather than normal impressioning where you'll introduce it, you'll wiggle, you'll take it out. And the tools are very different, so for impressioning you only need a blank and a file. For self-impressioning, the tools are often very complex and hard to get hold of. Key blanks, unless they're restricted, are pretty cheap and easy to get. So you think, yeah, why isn't everyone using this? Well, it's great, but it's always followed by the caveat of it's great when it works, because it doesn't work all the time. So yeah, reliability is a big problem. The tools used and the technique used can stop it working. The tools are typically either complete unobtainium, you just can't get them, or they're restricted to government agencies, or they're really hard to make. The R&D investment in them is huge. I mean, this is the same with all lock tool design, but self-impressioning tools, when you're designing them and developing them, can be super frustrating because you'll spend all this time doing it, and when it doesn't work at the end, it's just infuriating. And even when you can get the tooling, you have other problems. So jumping elements is one. So often a lever will inch its way down, and then when it's just about to go into a false gate, the stump will go into it and sort of jump it away from your impressioning medium, which will lead to you not getting an impression, even though the element is wrong. And ProTech 1 and 2 also has a neat defense, which we'll have a look at later. And again, imperfect application of technique will stop it working. You get specific defenses as well. We'll have a look at a few of those specific defenses. But this is what's happening in a lock when you impression it with a standard blank. So when you're moving the blank up and down, when you move it down on the outside, you'll get a pivot point somewhere in the lock, and the end of the blank will go up, and vice versa. So you can get away with this on the locks with worse tolerances, but on locks with better tolerances, you'll get more movement further away from the pivot point than you will near the pivot point, and this can give inaccurate results. You'll get uneven impressions. And basically, what we can say is if the impressioner moves more than the amount of pin wobble at any point, then it'll fail. If it moves equal to or less than the amount of pin wobble, so that's the wobble of a correctly set pin, then it should work. In the perfect world, this is what would happen with an impressioner and a self-impressioner. Every part of the tool would move in the same plane by the same amount. I know the arrows aren't identical, I did it on paint. And I couldn't copy and paste because of the background, don't worry. This fixes it. This is a pullback tool, so this is for standard impressioning. You need to specially prepare the blank to use this tool, but this doesn't wobble the blank, it pulls the blank back and all the pins get lifted an identical amount. A self-impressioning tool has to have resistance, so the bits that move in it have to be under an amount of pressure, otherwise when you introduce it into the lock, the springs or whatever will just push everything down to the lowest point and it'll just fail instantly. And that resistance has to be stronger than the spring, so it doesn't just flop, but it has to be less than the amount of pressure put on it when you tension the lock and move it. But that sounds harsh, but that gives you an actually huge window. In the ideal world, you'd want the resistance of each element to be identical as well. And while we're in the perfect world, you want your self-impressioning tool to be able to automatically detect whether an element is binding or not and move itself automatically. But the biggest one is reliability. If you can get a self-impressioning tool to be 90–95% reliable, because no tool's 100%, then you're doing pretty well. And not get stuck in the lock. There are some tools that it's quite easy to get the self-impressioner stuck in the lock if you don't use it properly. So that's pretty important. The tools don't have to look like the key, but in the ideal world, once you've removed it and you've got an open, you'll get a bitting from it, so you can then go and cut a key for future entry. It'll be very easy to use, so typically less than 5 minutes training, less than a minute in the ideal world, and very often when locks self-impression, they will go in less than a minute, as we'll see soon. The tool, nice if it's reusable. There have been sort of one-off tools where they're sort of sacrificial self-impressioners, but the better ones are the ones that you can use time and time again. And if you can use it as a key, that's also quite nice. But all of those constraints I've just mentioned, you can chuck them all away. So long as a tool works for any given lock, then it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, I'm a real sod for chasing perfection in things, but so long as a tool works, that's good enough. Let's have a look at some specific locks getting self-impressioned. So if it can be pressioned, then it can be self-impressioned, or in theory it can. The problem is key blanks don't move themselves, and so you need to have some sort of other mechanism of moving bits within the lock. So long as you can move the manipulatable elements within a lock, then you can manipulate it. The only things you can't really do this with are like magnetic locks and things that have got sort of a barrier between the keyway and the moving parts. So this is the tool I was on about earlier. So the problem with pin tumblers, or at least the problem to start with, was they all had identical springs and identical length drivers. And so this meant that the pin stack wanted to sort of equilibrate and move all to the same height, which happens to be the shear line. The original tool was called the Peanut. This is it here. HPC now sell a version of this. The resistance in this tool comes from the plastic it's encased in, which is Delrin. This is a couple of more modern takes about it. You can get this set here for £20 delivered. It's actually a really cool set. I like this one. That's my own modified Southwood self-impression in tubular pick. And while we're at it, this is the world's smallest self-impressioning tool. It's about this big. It's a really cool little thing. So I don't know if anyone remembers this, the Bic pen trick on this was huge. I mean, if you're into lock sport, you should remember this. So this was the kryptonite locks, the kryptonite bike locks. And we can see this working. So again, blink and you'll miss this. So he's just putting a plastic pen casing into the lock and this will self-impression it. That's it. That was like seconds. You want to see it again? Look, you're going to see lots of videos like this of just people wiggling things. I wouldn't get too excited. I've seen other people use straws, like McDonald's straws, to do this. Toilet roll, cardboard, the pen lid as well as the pen. Pretty much anything used to be able to self-impression these locks. It actually almost bankrupted Kryptonite, sorry. They had to offer upgrades and recall all of the locks. And this still works on a lot of the cheap and nasty, well, I say cheap and nasty, this one's not too bad. This still works on a hell of a lot of tubular locks. So, hold on. This doesn't work all the time though, that's the problem with it. The technique I used there was just wiggling it, and that's the technique most people use. But there's an actual specific technique you're meant to use with this tool, which I'll tell you about in a minute. The resistance on the tines, that can lead to failure. And the better locks, the amount of pin wobble, so the tolerance, that can ruin it too. And you also get, since the peanut, that was like in the 60s, I think, or the 50s, since that has been around, there's been quite a lot of locks developed that specifically defend against this tool. So yeah, wiggling it around works for the cheap locks, and this is the technique most people know. This is the only technique most people know to use with this tool. But the original inventor had a different technique, and this is actually much better. So what you do is you'll pop that collar down so you've got some tension on the tines. You want it at least as strong or as stronger than the strongest spring in the lock. And what you do is you insert the tool and you tension. When you withdraw the tool, you want to withdraw it the same amount or less than the amount of pin wobble. So typically 1 or 2 thou, it's not much. Then you'll take your impression, come off the tension, withdraw the tool just a little bit again, tension, impression, and just repeat this process. That's the proper technique you're meant to use. And it actually works a lot better when you get it, but moving 1 or 2 thou in and out of the lock, it's really difficult to do for a human. It'd be nice if there was a tool like this that existed that sort of automatically moved it that tiny amount every time. And I'm looking at making one, but it's not happened yet. And you also get specific defenses against this tool. So Ace 2, Chicago lock, their second variation of their Ace lock, they changed the springs in there, and they changed the length of the drivers. So that unbalanced the stack then. So that just stopped the wiggling from working. The idea was when you brought it back to non-tension, the strongest spring would push one of those movable tines too high, and that ruined the impression instantly. Kensington defense, we'll have a look at that. Baton has got a pin driving defense. Okay, so yeah, this is Ace 2's variable springs. You've got some springs that are made from steel, some that are made of copper, and you've got different length drivers. They also improved the tolerance in the lock as well, so the amount of pin wobble was vastly reduced. Using that technique I spoke about before will work on an Ace 2. It's just very, very difficult to pull off. This is Kensington's defense. This is actually the lock I just self-impressioned. They put this little nose on the end of the key, and that goes into a corresponding hole in the lock. Now, if you just rock up with your standard tubular self-impressioner, it'll work. It'll go in a couple of seconds. But if you don't imitate the nose, then the driver pin from chamber 1, when you go around 1 click, shoots up and it acts as a trap pin. And that blocks the lock, or it's meant to block the lock. You can just push it back down again because it's only on a spring. Or what I do is I just self-impression this lock. So what I'll do first, I'll use what I call a Kensington adapter. It's just this bit of metal taken off a key. And you just pop that in the lock first, then use your self-impressioning tool. It doesn't have to be the nose from a key. It can be anything, a bit of paper clip, doesn't even have to be metal. As long as it sits in that hole, then your standard tool will work. Baton's got quite a clever defense against this. So they've removed the notches from the center posts. So what drives the lock now is the sort of castellations. They've got exaggerated castellations around the edge of the key. And it's the pins themselves that drive the lock. So what this does, if you try and pick it or self-impression it, you have to use the pins to tension the lock again, unless you can maybe grab the nose somehow and tension it off that. But if you use the pins directly, what'll happen is one of those pins will bind, even though it might be correct, because you're using it to drive the lock. It doesn't happen with the key because everything's pushed down to the correct depth before tension's ever applied, but when you're picking or impressioning, this gives you false readings. This is another defense. Baton used this sort of shield. Other companies do this as well. And you have to have a corresponding thin-stemmed key that will fit in there, so that stops most of these tools from fitting. Yeah, like Greenwald, they use them, right? But Pickmasters sell this tool, which is just like the key. So as long as you can mimic the key, it'll work again. Dimple self-impression really nicely. This is because you haven't got much height within a dimple keyway, so you have relatively few numbers of cuts. And foil impression is used quite a lot on dimple locks. So let's have a look at this working. So this is the sort of key blank, if you like. And you've got holes there that the pins are going to end up sinking into. And he covers these holes with foil. So this is him applying the foil, which is actually really easy, quick. So this is now effectively a key blank. And what was the other timing on that? 2 minutes. Okay, so now here it is going into the lock. And it's just a wiggle technique. Like, again, a child can do this. That's it. And that's quite a high security dimple lock as well, I think. The Kale. It's not super high security, but it's a decent lock. Cabot actually have quite an interesting defense against this. They use pins with these little tips on the end, these sharp little hats. So this is like a standard pin, and this is their anti-foil impression pin. And the idea of the little hats is they pierce the foil, and the pin ends up dropping too deep because there's more pressure on a smaller amount of area. It breaks through the foil. This is another take on self-impression in dimple locks. This is quite a rare tool. Oh, well, it hasn't been around long. So well, you'll see it when he takes it out, but that's copper wire. So it's the same sort of blank, but he's put copper wire over the holes instead of foil. And he's using this ratchet instead of wiggling it himself. So that's it. Ridiculous, isn't it? And this can be used as a key again, and you can get a bit in from it and everything else. Pretty cool. And this is just an example of some other key blanks that use exactly the same technique. There's a whole range of them for different dimple locks now. Another approach is using foam. So this is a friend of mine, Mr. Cocolitos. He impressioned this high security French vachette lock using foam. I don't think all the pins were in there though. It was just a proof of concept, but well, you'll see. So he uses like a specially prepared tensioner, which is half a key cut away. I'm going to skip forward a bit because he spends forever stuffing the foam into the lock. Okay, don't look away because this happens really quickly. So tensioners going in. That's it. There are other tools that use foam as well to self-impression dimple locks. There was one for the Avocet ABS in the UK, but that wasn't very good. But the principle works, at least. You can probably self-impression pin-in-pin systems too, so Avocet ABS, multi-lock, and the clones of them. Only your tool is going to have to cope with the binding order of the outer than the inner pins. And so it's going to have to be more complicated, but if the tool or the impression in medium can do that, there's no reason why you can't self-impression the more complicated dimple locks too. I've heard other people using different things, so plasticine in those holes, or chewing gum, or lead or some other sort of squishy metal. I've heard can work. And I'm developing a couple of self-impressioning tools for dimple locks at the moment. Wafer locks, we've probably all seen the turbo decoder. We'll have a look at it in a minute. But these can also be foil impressions. Let's have a look at that. So these are foil self-impressioners for wafer auto locks. The little shim there, that's a little shim that is withdrawing and putting back. That's quite important. If you don't use that, then the tool will get stuck. So you use it when you're inserting the tool and you're using it when you're extracting the tool. So there it is. Now you extract the shim, it's ready to go now. This is some American car. I don't know which one. That's it. So he was just wiggling it up and down. And what happens is the wafers eat into the foil and you end up with a key, effectively. So now he's inserting the shim again to withdraw the lock. Withdraw the tool even from the lock. Can be a bit fiddly. That's because the foil's all been squished down now and it's not all nice and smooth anymore. That's it, he's got it. So that's foil impressioning on wafer locks, but this next tool, this is one of my favourite tools of all time. So this is the turbo decoder. Thank you to turbo decoders for this. So this concept has been around for ages, self-impression in car locks. The original tools used catgut, the stuff that you used to get in tennis rackets. I don't think you get it anymore in tennis rackets, but you used it. This tool is a work of art. Like the dude who developed this, Bulgarian guy, he took it to a whole new level. So you've got these little movable arms, and they're all under spring pressure. And you've got the shim that stops the tool from getting stuck. It satisfies every constraint I went through earlier about like the perfect self-impressioning tool. This satisfies every single one of them. And this is it opening a Porsche. He does these turbo decoders for pretty much every auto lock out there now. And if you ever get a chance to see one in the flesh, don't pass it up. Just have a look at it. It is a stunning little thing. All wire EDM'd. So he's resetting the tool at the moment. This will give you a bit in at the end of it and will act as a key, temporarily at least. So this isn't as disorganized as some of the others. He's not simply wiggling. He's taking the impression by moving this button on the back. And what that's doing is it's moving every movable element in the tool a very precise amount in the same plane, which increases reliability. He's getting there. So this is taking longer than some of the others, but I think it's about 40 seconds in totality. There you go. That's a pore she's opened. Pin tumblers can also be foil impressions. You'd use a similar sort of thing I showed you to the wafer. So this is a prepared blank. The channels are where the pins drop down into, and the fingers are what provide support to the foil, give them some resistance. And this is Locksmith Army self-impression in a pin tumbler. Okay, so there's the prepared blank, if you like, ready to be used. 4310. This is him inserting it. So again, you've got a shim that keeps all the pins up high, and then he takes the shim away. It takes a while. This actually takes a couple of minutes. So I'll just skip forward a little. But that's it. So this will work on pretty much any pin tumbler anyway. Even the better ones. I've had many ideas to make self-impressioners for pin tumblers over the years. Maybe you can replace the foil with other materials, or have some sort of crazy complicated tool like the turbo decoder that has lots of movable little things. Paracentricity of the keyway can make life a little difficult, so the more profiling you've got can make tool making harder. But remember that as soon as your tool is in the lock, the chambers themselves have no profiling on them. The chambers themselves are just round holes, because otherwise the pin couldn't move up and down. So it's only getting the tool in and out of the lock that is a problem. Once it's in there, you're okay. And obviously getting it back out, if you care about that. If all you care about is opening the lock and then maybe you take the lock out the door or whatever, then maybe you're not bothered about extracting the tool. Yeah, I've got another few tools for pin tumbler self-impressioning. Lever locks, these can definitely be self-impressioned. And so non-curtain lever locks, do we know the difference between a curtained and a non-curtained lever lock? Okay, so a non-curtained lever lock is a lever lock that you've just got the keyway. There's nothing else in there. So a curtain is an extra movable piece of metal within the keyway that is specifically there to stop you getting tools in. So non-curtained, it's just the keyhole. And we've had these things called magic keys around for quite a while now. This is a single-sided magic key, and this is for the double-sided magic keys like the Matura locks and a lot of the Italian locks and continental lever locks. The resistance from this tool, or this particular magic key, I should say, because you get different ones, comes from the actual elements themselves. They are springs, so the little arms push out against their housing. And let's have a look at the magic key in action. So this is a non-curtained lever lock. You've just got the keyway. This is a Matura. So that's the key for it. It's not uncomplicated. These locks require 4 throws to unlock and lock them. So this is a magic key that he's reset beforehand. So everything is up at its highest height. All those little fingers are as high as they can go at the moment. So Matura locks I'm not a fan of them. I don't think they're very good. The tolerances on them mean you can just do the wiggle thing again, and that pivot in action doesn't bother these locks. They're loose enough inside for you to get away with it. Okay, so that's 1 throw. Now he's going to pick up another tool to do the second throw. The third throw is the first tool again, and the fourth throw is the second tool again. And these are used in really high security applications as well. It's just an advert, it's okay, it's not finishing. Okay, so that's that second one gone now. Now we'll use the first self-impression just to throw straight back again. Then I'll use the second one again to finish the opening. Crazy effective things. I really like the magic keys.
Did he only have to use two tools because it's one-sided?
Okay, yeah, so the key's double-sided, but on the first throw, it'll use the one side of the key. On the second throw, it'll use the other side of the key. And the third throw, it's just the whole process repeated again.
Yeah, so if he had a double-sided magic key, that would have worked.
Yeah, if he had a double-sided magic, yeah, exactly. He could have just done that. If you have full skates, which those locks don't, but if you have full skates, you've got this jumping thing I spoke about earlier that can pull the lever away from your impressioner, and then you won't get an impression. You can fix this with very precise control of your tool's movement. Warding as well can provide a barrier to this sort of thing. So sometimes you have warding which is like S-shape on the outside of the keyway, so your tool has to be S-shaped. And as well as that, you'll sometimes get internal warding, which there are obstructions on the inside of the lock, which again your tool has to cope with. Good tolerances of the lock will make it more difficult, and uneven tool movement. This is a newer self-impression in Magic Key from Lucky Locks. It's very similar to the turbo decoder in that you've got this handle on the back which moves the impression in pack a very precise amount every time, and that'll lead to better results. Curtain lever locks. Okay, yeah, another awesome paint diagram. Curtain lever locks give you the problem of pin travel. So if the distance between the highest and the lowest cut is this, and the curtain is here, the other side of your key, if you've only got this much potential travel for your pin or movable thing, then it can never reach the lowest cut. But there can be impression, so there can be self-impression too. It's just you have to have a tool that copes with this movement restriction, and that's why the tools are rare. You also have to be able to pressurize the pins in this small space that you've got. So the magic keys often have something on the other side of the fingers that do the pressuring. So if the maximum travel range is less than or equal to the distance between the highest and the lowest cut, then it's it'll work so long as your movement range can cope with the maximum travel. You can use maybe telescoping pins, that might be a way around the problem. I don't like that idea. The movable things within lever locks have to be quite strong because the springs are quite strong, so telescoping pins I think could be a bit weak. There's maybe other ways you can get around it. This is another take on self-impression in lever locks. This is quite a cool little thing. This only works on the lower tolerance locks, but it works quite well. So instead of having like quite precise movable little fingers, you've got these sort of bristles, like a toothbrush type thing. This is the self-impressioner here. So self-impressioning tools don't have to be high-tech. They can be pretty ghetto like this. 155. Okay, so this is it working. That's it, it's going, that's it. So even cheap homemade tools can be frighteningly effective. Three minutes, what happens at 3 minutes? Let's see. Okay, he just does it again. This is a different lock, but it's the same result. And yeah, again, I've got more. I've got about 1 million tools that I'm developing at any one time, and I'm developing curtained lever lock self-impressioners at the moment. Pump locks, or pomp. This is like the French people's take on the radial pin tumbler, so like the tubular. They're locks like the Fichet monopole, Pollux, Fontaine, Picard, and these locks work by you pushing the key in. That's why it's called a pump lock. You pump the key into the lock. Thanks to Q for this. He has developed this awesome thing. So the Fichet monopole, it's always been a really high security lock, but this is the new version of it. So instead of just having heights that the levers move to, you have heights and angles. So you've got like 2 factors for each lever. And let's have a look at his key, his keys tool. It does work as a key. Look at this thing. This thing's brilliant. So he takes the impression on this by pushing a little button on the top. Or at least that does the heights. And when he thinks the heights are set right, the little paddle on the end does the angles. You get these on safes and all sorts. That's okay, that's it, it's open. You get these on safes, you get these on really high security things. And he also does a self-impression for the Pollux type locks. Let's have a look at that. We haven't got sound really, have we? It's nice. He's just got some crazy jazz music on in the background. You're not really missing anything. So this tool's brilliant. You can actually use this tool one-handed, which is what he does. 3D printed handles. Yeah. This guy makes some great tools. So he's taking the impression on this by rotating the second little cog on the back. Sort of tensions and takes the impression at once. There you go, that's it. That lock's open too. So disc detainer locks, can they be impressioned or self-impressioned? Well, using a traditional blank, you won't see it happen very often. The only time I've ever seen it happen was Barry Wells did it on his Black Bag blog years ago. And he used a reduced contact area, so he cut away bits of metal. So the point was, it was easier to get marks from the lock, because getting reliable marks from a disc detainer lock is very difficult. This was refined by Jordan Apper and Yako, who further improved getting marks by polishing the key. But even with this reduction in area and preparation of the blank, it's still difficult to get reliable readings. And that's because this is happening. So the pin wobble of a disc detainer, or the disc wobble, if you're just wiggling the blank up and down, then the disc, as it can only move within its housing, and that's not a lot of movement. And that's further complicated by the fact that, let's say you get an impression and you file away, and then the disc moves around a little, and you file away. As soon as the disc starts getting to 90 degrees from where it started, you have to take the impression in the same plane as the disc is sitting, and the disc sits differently for each disc in the lock. So that means you have to somehow move the blank in every direction reliably, up, down, left, right, and I think that's why it's difficult. So you can get marks, but it's difficult to do reliably. So I guess you can't self-impression in them. So this is a tool I made. So this is me zeroing an Abloy Classic. And this is a tool going into the lock now. And as you can see again, the technique's very much the same for all of these tools. I'm tensioning, taking an impression, tensioning, taking an impression. That's it, locks open. So that's, what, 13 seconds. So yes, you can do it. It comes down to technique. The This tool actually got invented because I did a pick for Abloy Classic, but someone else had made it in secret, and as soon as my tool was public, they could publicly release theirs, and so that annoyed me, so that made me make a better tool. That's where this came from. So yeah, this is my own technique, self-impressioning. So what I'm doing is I'm not wiggling the discs up and down and left and right within the housing, like the blank self-impressioning method. I'm taking my impression in the same plane of rotation as the discs move, so a rotational impression. And then you can get your pin or disc wobble then. It's much more exaggerated if you do it rotationally rather than just wiggling within the shell. This also works on all normal disc detainer locks, and a variant of this method also works on the rest of Abloy too, so all the way up to Protec 2, so long as you disable the blocking system. And that tool has undergone quite a few revisions now, and it's now getting to a point where it's pretty awesome. But I've got this tool with me. I'm not going to actually show the tool on the video, but I mean, you're more than welcome to come and ask me and have a little play with it or whatever. Or at least the old version in that video. Abloy Protec. Okay, this is an oldie but goodie. Bloody song. This isn't my video. This is some, well, it's a Bulgarian dude. So this video has been argued over more than any other video ever, I think. Loads of people think it's fake. From what I know of impression in Abloy, you'll see the technique's very similar to what I use, so I don't think it's fake. But it does go on for a bit, so I'll skip ahead. Wait a minute. Okay, so there's the tool going in the lock. Let's see that again. And he does a very similar thing to what I do. He'll tension, take an impression in a rotary plane. I actually developed my self-impressioner and then found this video again after many years and was like, oh my God, okay, this makes sense, yeah. So this takes a couple of minutes, but I mean, I think that's pretty good for an Abloy Protec. I'll skip ahead a little bit. So he's resetting the discs, tensioning, taking an impression. Resetting the disc, tension, take an impression. I emailed him when I first saw this and was like, is that real? And he was like, yeah, of course. Why would I do all this and it not be real? So I get that accusation quite a lot on videos I make. People think I've gone through a lot of time and effort just to make a fake video. So what's happening here is the disc, the wrong disc is walking its way around until it's correct. And when it's correct, it'll wobble. And then another wrong disc will start walking its way around until that's correct. And then another one will bind. Okay, there you go. Pretty cool. But yeah, like I say, this has been argued about a lot. So you decide whether it's real or fake. Abloy Protec has actually got quite a cool defense against self-impressioning. So Abloy were under the impression that it was impossible to impression or self-impression locks when I went to see them, about a year ago. And so this is actually an accidental defense, but it's quite good. So the blocking system, the disc blocking system, what it does, it also acts to reduce wear in the lock. And it does that by if the disc or the key is worn a little, when you turn it, the disc blocking system will bring that disc back around to where it should be. It's like its nearest bitting, so its nearest cut. And if you're trying to impression or self-impression a lock, this has the effect of pulling the disc away from your impressioner or your blank. Like what I was talking about with the lever locks, exactly the same thing. It'll jump back away from your self-impressioner. And this can also happen on other Abloy locks too. So Abloy Classic, it can happen too. So you have to get around the disc blocking system. If you can do that, then it becomes possible. You can also self-impression other tubular variants, the van lock or the V series. These are some pretty high security locks. That's the van lock. That's the V series. 2-bar Galaxy Series 35 in the top corner there. There's no reason why you can't self-impression all of these. Yeah. The Galaxy and the Series 35 for that matter could make their locks a lot more resistant to self-impressioning than they currently are, but they don't. Bilock, there's no reason why you can't self-impression bilocks. Foil impression, they're a great candidate for foil impressioning. Or a complex tool like the turbo decoder. You've got quite a lot of open space within the keyway here to get things in. I actually have a proof of concept tool for bilock with me, self-impressioner. It's worked on 4 pins, so I've not got it working on a full lock yet, but the concept works. There's no reason why it won't work. I just broke the tool. Other sidebar locks are Acidesmo and 3KS. Again, I'm looking at making tools for these at the moment. There's no reason why these can't be self-impressioned. The only thing you need to remember with these locks is there aren't any springs to push the elements down as soon as you've taken your impression. So you're going to have to do that manually or use a tool that has impressioning arms that do it for you. Acid Twin, the sidebar in this can be self-impressions, as can the top pins. Medico, again, Medico can be self-impressioned, but you need to impression the pins and then impression the sidebar, but luckily turning it in one direction binds the one and turning it in the other direction binds the other. So basically, what locks can't be self-impressioned? Not many, pretty much. The only locks I can think of are magnetic locks, so the MCS, Miwa, and that's because you've got no physical connection between the keyway and the movable bits. Maybe you could do it with some sort of magnetic feedback mechanism to find out when the elements were binding or not. So it could still be possible. And finally, tool design. So some of the tools we've looked at are pretty complicated, some are really simple. So the complicated ones could represent a barrier to developing your own tools for this sort of thing, but they don't have to be complicated. You've seen the brush thing. Even the foil impressioners aren't really complicated. There aren't any rules. So long as it works for any given lock, it works. It doesn't have to look like the key. It doesn't have to have 10,000 operations like the key. It really only has to work once. And consider the materials that you can use as well. So elastic deformation of a material is when a material can take an amount of strain and it'll come back to where it was originally. The value of this only has to be equal to or greater than the length of one spring within the given lock that you're attacking. The plastic deformation is the amount of pressure a material can take before it stays bent. And this needs to be greater than the amount of pressure that can be created via tensioning. So however much pressure you can put on a core by applying tension, which is a lot, then so long as the material gives under less tension or less pressure than that, then it should work. There are loads of materials that have been used for this sort of thing. So soft metals like lead or woods metal, plastic, copper, the brushes we saw earlier, springs, foam, foil, memory metal. It's a good idea. Maybe that can be utilised in this sort of thing. And finally, like measurement, I use something like this, which is like a strain gauge or a spring tester. I make quite a lot of good use of those to measure how much force a particular movable element or material can take before it gives. And you don't have to use little meters like this. I've seen people using a kitchen scale with a hook attached to it, or like the luggage scales with a hook on the end, and just using that to pull on materials to see how much strain it will take. And that's it. We're done. Thank you. Ooh. Any questions? Yes, mate. Okay, so the question was, how can we find out more about self-impression? Okay, so I did this talk because it's like something that's never really spoken about, or there's not much information out there about self-impressioning. And the quick answer is, it's difficult. Magic tools, that you can always find those online. You can always find self-impressioning tools online. So if you want to get inspiration, you can always find, or a good one, locksmith expos. You'll get to see a lot of tools in person there, and that'll give you a lot of ideas and should help. But other than that, I mean, hit me up. I'll always help. There aren't many other people I know who do this sort of thing. Anyone else? Yes, mate. Oh, that's a pretty good question. Okay, so the foil impressioning, what kind of foil are we using? So a lot of kits come with different thicknesses of foil because different locks have different strength springs. It depends on the lock is the answer. So some locks you'll have to like double up the foil. They come in different thicknesses, micron thicknesses, and so if you get into foil impressioning, you'll end up using a range of different foils. Is that it? Are we good? Yeah? Okay.